Add. Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the Space Apps Virtual Bootcamp. My name is Yasha Mose. I'm a member of the global organizing team for Space Apps COVID-19 Challenge. And today I have a privilege of talking to Dr. Ken Jucks, who, among other roles at NASA, is a program manager for the Upper Atmosphere Research Program that is expanding humanity's understanding of ozone changes, among other things. He previously worked at the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory after getting his PhD in physical chemistry, studying molecular interactions and dynamics in ways that are way beyond my ability to understand it. So I'd rather let Dr. Jucks speak for himself and maybe start by explaining us a little bit more about the kind of work that he does at NASA and maybe what problems you're trying to solve, the big questions you're trying to answer.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm involved in a lot of projects at NASA. What I call my day job, which is managing the Upper Atmosphere Research Program, is trying to coordinate all of NASA's research activities related to what's going on in the stratosphere or what affects the stratosphere. So we try to understand depleting substances that get released from the surface that eventually make their way up to the stratosphere and then eventually destroy ozone. So that's a lot of the basics of what goes on there. There's a lot of physics that's driven behind that and a lot of open questions related to the physics, which a lot of the research program is actually centered on as well. So that's kind of the gist of what I do with my day job. What I have a number of night jobs in that I'm program scientist for a lot of our satellites. The first one and the oldest of the NASA satellites I'm program scientist for is for the Aura satellite, which currently has 2 instruments that are still working. The satellite's like 17 years old now. It's old enough to drive. It has one instrument that's still looking at the stratosphere that's working quite well, and we hope that it'll continue to work for about 4 or 5 more years if we're lucky. And the second one looks both at the stratosphere and the troposphere. So the one that looks at the stratosphere looks through the atmosphere in kind of glancing angle, which we call limb viewing geometry, which looks at a whole bunch of molecules that are in the stratosphere itself. And we use that to try to understand the processes that go on globally. The instrument that looks kind of through the atmosphere and light bounces off the surface, comes back up to the satellite, that's the ozone monitoring instrument. That's used for both ozone, and because its wavelength range is enough to measure a number of other molecules, it's highly effective at looking at air quality, which is what we're here to talk about today. I also do a number of things related to greenhouse gases, so CO2 and methane, which are going on. I have 3 missions that are involved doing that, and then one that's more for climate, which we're not going to talk about today.
That should keep you busy. So thank you again for finding the time to speak with our hackathon participants. Obviously, a lot of people, when they think of NASA, thinks about sending satellites to explore, the sun and the moon and mission to Mars and all those things. But obviously, NASA does a lot to advance Earth science, and sort of airborne science is a critical part of that. Maybe you could explain a little bit sort of that aspect of NASA's work.
Okay, so I'll start with the satellites and what they provide and what they don't. So satellites use the light from the sun, basically, or from what gets emitted from the atmosphere itself to try to understand what's going on. That's great for getting global pictures, but there's only so many things that a satellite is capable of measuring, just because there's only from that light, there's only so many wavelengths that the molecules in the atmosphere actually interact with that light. So we get a great global picture that's missing a lot of key elements. So with airborne science, what we try to do are put sensors on the airplane itself that fill out the physics picture. So we really try to understand what's going on with atmospheric dynamics, with atmospheric chemistry, to try to fill that out. So that's what we try to do with our airborne science, try to understand the big picture and combine that with the satellite data to truly understand what's going on in the atmosphere. I'm involved with right now with two different experiments that are involved with kind of what's going on in the upper troposphere and into the stratosphere that help us truly get that bigger understanding. One was supposed to be this year, but will now be next year, thanks to the virus outbreak, which would be flying out of Okinawa, Japan. And then the second one is one of our Earth Venture suborbitals, which will be flying right out of the middle of the United States of America. It's also been delayed some, but it'll be looking at what's going on with big convective thunderstorms and how they affect the amount of molecules that get into the stratosphere and then change the physics that goes on. These processes obviously occur in early summer, middle summer, late summer timeframe, and that's what that mission is trying to understand, all 3 seasons to understand that physics. So that's what we try to do with the airborne science, to truly understand what's going on.
Combining those two resources to get a fuller picture.
That's the point.
Right. And if space apps participants wanted to study the potential effects of COVID-19 on air quality, where would you suggest that they look at, and where they might find the data? What would be your advice to them?
So we're actually working on dashboards right now with our collaborators at the European Space Agency and the Japanese Space Agency as well, that will highlight a lot of the air quality related indices that we're actually seeing related to COVID-19. So one of the obvious ones is because this molecule has a very short atmospheric lifetime, is nitrogen dioxide. We measure that with the OMI instrument on the AURA satellite, and there's a follow-on instrument that the European Space Agency has called TROPOMI, which basically looking at the reflected sunlight off the surface, and we actually see quite dramatic signals from the NO2 changes when economic activity slowed down over various parts of the world. And we're looking at those data to truly understand why the NO2 went down, how it's going back up, and then with the changes in the NO2, how does that affect other molecules going on in the atmosphere? And in particular, in the troposphere, where we all live and breathe, NO2 is a great source for actually ozone, which at the surface is bad for us. And what we're trying to do is understand these interactions between lowering NO2 and the changes that happen with ozone, which is actually quite complicated.
Obviously, COVID-19 pandemic is a tragic event, and it's disruption of epic proportions for many people. But at the same time, it also is a unique, almost like a science experiment that because of all those distractions, we see people's habits change and less traveling and flying. So I'm wondering, from a scientist perspective, what kind of questions that brings up to you, and what you hope that you and other colleagues or space apps participants might be able to observe and study.
So in some ways, this changes in the atmosphere are I hate to use this word, but I'm going to use this term anyways. It's a geoengineering experiment, almost in reverse. So in many ways, human activity is a geoengineering experiment. We're emitting all sorts of stuff into the atmosphere, which changes it. And what we've done with the COVID-19 is, for at least for a short period of time, reduce that amount in the atmosphere. And it gives us the opportunity to actually see what happens with all of the rest of the Earth system and how that changes when we reduce how much we're emitting. We also see, in particular, like northern India, we're seeing significant changes in aerosol concentrations, and the physics behind aerosol changes are quite interesting. and there will be a lot of studies related to what's going on in northern India, why those aerosols are changing as much as they are. Obviously, some of that has to do with the emissions, but there's a lot of other things that are going on there as well. And many scientists are extremely interested in that problem right now.
Well, thank you again so much for your time and sharing a little bit about your work and the type of questions you're trying to solve. We look forward to what our Space Up participants do with the challenges related to air quality, and be happy to report them back to you. So thank you again very, very much.
Okay, you're welcome.